Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is Kid Nate of BloodyElbow.com, joined once again by Connor Rubish and Zane Simon, also of BloodyElbow.com. We are here for the MMA Vivisection UFC 187. This was Care City in the Care Don't Care preview yesterday. This is possibly the best card of the year. Is it the best card of the year, Connor?
Boy, it looks an awful lot like it. It's kind of the antithesis to the Care Don't Care you guys had last week, huh?
The last several Care Don't Cares, actually,
Yeah.
including the UFC 186 pay-per-view. And Zane ducked away, or I would ask him his thoughts.
I'm
But
still here.
you're
It's a
still...
pretty damn good card, isn't it?
Yes, the three fights on Fight Pass are nothing special, but hell, they're on Fight Pass. Who cares? The Fox Sports 1 undercard is fun. Nothing earth-shattering, but a couple of fights that matter, and all the fights look fun, to the extent that Rafael Natal can be in a fun fight. But Anthony Rumble Johnson, Daniel Cormier, Chris Weidman, Vitor Belfort, stacked with meaning, stacked with great fights. This is great stuff. General thoughts on the card, Zane, before we dive into the fight-by-fight previews.
Yeah, I think top to bottom, this is the best card of the year. I mean, with John Jones on it, it would have been hands down. But going all the way, looking at the very first fight all the way to the last, I don't see one fight that looks like it's set to really disappoint. Like Rafael Natal is probably the most boring fighter on here, and he's fighting Uriah Hall, who has the ability to turn in a mediocre performance. That fight could easily just be like 3 rounds of stalling, but if it's not,
with some high-fiving, interspersed with high fives.
But both those guys, both those guys have kind of redeemed themselves too. Like Uriah Hall's last fight was fun, and Rafael Natal's fight was more fun than it had any right to be. His fight with Tom Watson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a fun fight. And Rafael Natal, it is what it is. But let's jump right in here. First up, flyweights, Justin Scoggins and Josh Sampo. Justin Scoggins came in with a lot of hype. He's lost 2 fights in a row, one of which he was dominating and fell into a guillotine choke against John Moraga and fighting Josh Sampo. Thoughts on this one? Connor, you can go first.
Yeah, they're pretty clearly trying to get Justin Scoggins another win. The flyweight division's a tricky place to do that because while the shallowness does make it feel like there's not enough top fighters, it also kind of means there's not enough journeymen to feed to your prospects. So it's not exactly an easy fight for Justin Scoggins. Josh Sampo is a good fighter. He's very tricky for a guy like Scoggins too. We saw the difficulty Scoggins had with the submissions of John Moraga, and Sampo's got a really good guard, really good ground game. He's pretty damn good in his feet too. His only really big flaw is that he just really has no takedown defense. He's really content to be taken, put on his back, and he'll work from there. I do expect Scoggins to win. I think Scoggins is more dynamic than Sampo. I think he has a more complete game. I think he's more powerful. And he's younger and fresher than Sampo by far. So I do expect him to win. But it should be a good fight. It's a pretty solid opener for anybody who's going to be around for the Fight Pass prelims. It's a pretty damn good fight.
And Zane, your thoughts on the fight?
Yeah, Scoggins is somebody who really has... I think he's hit the wall that prospects hit when they're not on the path to immediate greatness. Very few fighters are on that path where in 3 years they're going to be holding a belt. And everybody else, they tend to lose a couple fights, and they tend, the fight Scoggins lost, he fought a much more experienced Dustin Ortiz and barely lost. And then Moraga,
very underrated Dustin Ortiz too.
Still very underrated Dustin Ortiz. And then Moraga's the kind of guy who everybody beats him up until he chokes them out. I mean, that's just what he does, and he's a really dangerous fighter for young fighters to face because he's tough and he's opportunistic. So, I don't really fault Scoggins for losing those fights. It just means that he's not Chris Weidman, and that's okay. He should beat Sampo. I think the real biggest thing for me that I've seen out of Sampo, I expected him to be a lot better in the UFC than he was, and I think the biggest thing I've seen is that he's really not dynamic enough to be a top flyweight or anywhere near a top flyweight. And especially that loss over to Patrick Houlihan. Houlihan he's basically all very dynamic but without any real power or consistency, and he still kind of ran Sampo over. So I think that Scoggins is a much better fighter than Houlihan, but has a lot of the same skills.
Yeah.
And I expect Scoggins to look similarly dominant here.
And the odds makers like them some Scoggins. They've got him heavily favored, anywhere from minus 362 all the way up to minus 400. And Sampo's the underdog at plus 280 all the way up to plus 336. And that brings us to our second fight of the Fight Pass prelims. Lightweights, Islam Makhachev versus Leo, surely he doesn't pronounce it this way, Kuntz.
Kuntz is the way that name is traditionally pronounced, I
Leo
believe.
Kuntz. So, Makhachev versus Kuntz. Zane, it's a minefield for me. What do you make of the bout?
Makhachev is sort of like the prototypical developing Russian. Like his strikes are kind of winging and big single strikes, but he's got a lot of power and accuracy in there, just from that sort of Sambo background of looking for one big shot and landing one big shot at a time. But beyond that, like, he's just really a consummate wrestler and grappler, and not a great controlling fighter there, but just really the kind of wrestler who's going to take you down and rough you up from every position and never give you any space to breathe. And, great scrambler, great athlete, kind of a blue chip prospect who, if he can get his striking to follow up to where his wrestling is and close up some of his grappling holes, will be something special. Kuntz is just, I don't know, he just seems kind of like, he's probably better than I'm giving him credit for, but he just seems kind of like filler to me, like cannon fodder for a blue chip prospect. He's got a long record on the UFC or the US regional scene without any wins of note, and I think he's just going to be physically overwhelmed and technically overwhelmed by a much better fighter here.
I see. And Connor, your thoughts?
Well, there's some kind of backdoor dealing going on with this fight because Leo Kuntz is now at AKA, and that's where Khabib Nurmagomedov has been training recently, and Nurmagomedov is a training partner with Makhachev.
I thought Kuntz is ATT is what his Sherdog thing says. Is it AKA?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's Makhachev is the one at AKA. That's right. He's been at AKA with Nurmagomedov, right?
Yeah, he splits time between AKA and Spirit. Spirit Team, is that what it's called? It's Nurmagomedov has built his own gym in Russia, Fight Spirit,
okay.
And that's
Fight
where
Spirit.
he all of his he and his brothers train, and they're young guys they're bringing up, and so Makhachev is very much part of Fight Spirit Team.
And he's a lot like Nurmagomedov stylistically. Like he's very much, like Zane said, that quintessential Sambo style where even though his striking does look like it needs a lot of development, he could very well do what Nurmagomedov has done and just come in and have weird striking instincts and do well with what appears to be very crude mechanics. Nurmagomedov has a little help with that too because he hits pretty damn hard. He packs some power, and Makhachev doesn't have quite the same knockout potential, but he's definitely got the kind of grappling that Nurmagomedov has, and while he doesn't have tremendous top control, like Zane said, it's almost like Nurmagomedov's not really a top control wrestler either. It's almost worse for his opponents because they get the chance to get back up, and then they go right back down to the mat. So it's like this horribly exhausting, demoralizing process, and Makhachev does that to people too. And Kuntz is, I wouldn't call him filler. Like he's raw. He's tough. The fact that he's at ATT kind of means there might be some promise for him to improve, but from what we've seen from him so far, there's not really any reason to expect that he would beat a prospect on Makhachev's level.
And the odds makers like them some Makhachev as well. They've got him heavily favored, minus 315 all the way up to minus 365. Leo Kuntz is the underdog, plus 250 all the way up to plus 300. That brings us to the final fight on the Fight Pass prelims, Mike Pyle versus Colby Covington. And Connor, you can go first.
I love me some Mike Pyle, and I think everybody loves them some Mike Pyle. I don't I don't think there's anybody who could not enjoy a Mike Pyle fight. Unfortunately, I think it might be kind of a tough matchup for him. Like Mike Pyle's always, we'll bring back the Zane meme and say that Mike Pyle's always had kind of a flawed process. When it comes to strategically approaching the fight, like Mike is really good in basically every phase. And he's good in transitions too, like he will grab onto that clinch after stopping a takedown, he'll throw some knees, he'll throw punches on the break, but there's still just kind of this general clunkiness to his game. Like Mike Pyle really comes across like a self-taught fighter who, while being an absolute natural, still kind of seems rough around the edges. And Covington is kind of the exact kind of guy that I expect to have success against Pyle, just because he's like absolutely determined to get takedowns all the damn time. And Mike Pyle really thrives when he has a guy who's willing to duke it out with him. Because his submission grappling is good, his clinch striking is good. It's the takedown defense that really tends to give him trouble. And so I'm going to regretfully pick Colby Covington by decision, but I'm hoping Mike Pyle wins.
But you has a sad. That's what you're trying to say.
I has a great big sad.
All right. And Zane, do you has a sad too, or are you picking Mike Pyle?
I don't know. Like, this is one of those times where, I mean, this is kind of like one of those fights that will tell me a whole lot about Colby Covington that I'm not sure I know 100% yet. Because, like, Mike Pyle's a gigantic step up in competition from who Covington has been fighting. Covington has looked good, but he's looked good against Wong On Ying and Wagner Silva, which are like the lowest end of tough talent, the absolute lowest end. And Wagner Silva, that was even a fight that went 3 rounds, so it's not like, and it was dominant, but it's not like Covington's just like absolutely knocking guys out of there with a quickness for everybody. And if he gives Pyle a bunch of time and gets tired or gets dragged into some deep water, I don't know how he'll do. So a part of me, like, stylistically, I think this is a great fight for Covington against a veteran. Like, Pyle is the kind of vet that Covington can beat. Somebody who is willing to take the fight wherever it comes to him and isn't the best wrestler in the division. Like, he's a good wrestler, but he's not a great, he's not going to stop the kind of takedowns that Covington can hit necessarily. But if the fight goes more than a round, do I still feel safe picking Covington? I don't know about that. And I don't know. I think I'm gonna pick Covington in the vote for the new blood sort of way. But I do think that there's every chance that Covington gets submitted here.
I'm thinking of like Pyle versus Waldberger, and how confusing like analyzing that fight makes analyzing this one, because Waldberger for portions of that fight was actually outstriking Mike Pyle and was being competitive with him on the feet, and that says horrible things about Mike Pyle's consistency. But also Mike Pyle just like turned it on out of nowhere and absolutely starched Waldberger in the 3rd round of that fight, and I know he can do that to anybody. So. Yeah. And I know he can take a beating, too. Like, even though he's looked really chinny lately, he has also come back from some tremendous shots, looked really groggy, and come back to finish the fight, if not win. So.
Well, I mean, this is somebody who took Rick Story to a split decision in 2013. Like, that's just a couple of years ago. And I would say the thing with Waldberger is he has much better punching mechanics than Covington does. Like,
True.
Waldberger's offensive striking, his boxing has actually been good. That's been one of the big flaws in his game, is that his boxing's good enough that he thinks he won't get knocked out.
Yeah.
And I don't know that Covington has any such illusions. I think he's much more of a wing and overhand right, get in on the takedown, hit the power slam, and ride top position.
Yeah.
So I think that that matchup doesn't necessarily exist, but I do wonder if Pyle can play a good guard game, stay tricky for a round and a half, and get Covington's shots to be predictable. Then how does this fight look?
And that's the question we'll answer on Saturday. I think the other thing I'll have to raise is Mike Pyle is 39 years old.
Yeah.
The new drug testing regimes are going to bring an end to the Randy Couture phenomenon. Not saying anything about anybody in particular, just saying we're going to see fewer and fewer fighters kicking ass into their 40s. Pyle's right on that cusp, so he could be a a ghost of himself, of the Mike Pyle we know, coming to this fight. But as it is, Colby Covington is favored, not enormously, but the odds makers like him. They've got him favored at minus 260 all the way up to minus 300. And Mike Pyle is the underdog at plus 210 all the way up to plus 241. And that brings us to the first fight of the Fox Sports 1 card, 4-fight card, women's strawweights, Rose Namajunas versus Nina Ansaroff. And Zane, you can go first.
This is this is a fight between two women with a lot of athletic potential, and this is a very bad process fight. Like this is when you're talking about process and fighters who don't have it. Rose Namajunas and Nina Ansaroff are like the prototypes. And I think I'm a lot higher on what Namajunas can do. I think that she has strengths that she can really fight too well, namely her grappling. Like, it doesn't take a lot of process to be a good grappler, in that as long as you're getting takedowns, then you can scramble and make things happen on the ground. So I think that there's a lot more wiggle room with Namajunas' style. Whereas Ansaroff, she's a range kickboxer who can't maintain range, and as she gets backed up, she goes for increasingly low percentage strikes. Like, she has this horrible habit of, the moment a fighter gets her in the pocket, she starts to spam spinning back fists and just, like, over and over, just wings herself around, puts herself off balance, doesn't have any idea how to handle being closed down, but when she gets a chance to work at range, closes herself down. And like that, you can't fight like that. Even though Ansaroff is a good athlete, even though there's some promise, she has a good kicking game, and when she gets the chance, she can throw some good strikes. Like, the rest of her game is just not there at all. And I think that she's too one-dimensional to win consistently right now in the UFC with that style.
All right, and Connor?
Both of these fighters are really fun for a lot of the same reasons on the feet. Like both of them are, like Zane said, their athleticism is what stands out about them. The crazy, dynamic way in which they strike, both happy to throw themselves into attacks. It starts to fall apart for Ansaroff when she actually ends up in that. She throws herself so vehemently into her strikes that she ends up in this range where her skills aren't really there. And yet, for whatever reason, she cannot convince herself not to just fling herself into the pocket. Or, like Zane said, to get pushed back and end up there regardless. She doesn't have those. She's a fighter who thrives on distance, who doesn't have distance maintenance tools in her arsenal. Not many of them, anyway. Not consistent ones. And Namajunas is kind of the same, but she has that excellent fallback of just a tremendous guard game, which often goes right from clinch to guard. Where she'll jump into flying arm bars and pull guard and things like that. She's very dangerous on the ground. Both of these women have lost to Carla Esparza. You could even say that Rose Namajunas lost more decisively to Carla Esparza. But I do think that Namajunas stylistically here has the advantage just because of that submission grappling ability. I just don't see how Ansaroff can contend with her when this fight inevitably ends up in the clinch.
And the odds makers agree. They've got Namajunas favored minus 280 all the way up to minus 320. And Ansaroff is the underdog at plus 220 all the way up to plus 269. And that brings us to middleweights, Rafael Natal and Uriah Hall. The hype versus the snooze. Connor, you go first.
Like I said earlier, Rafael Natal's last fight against Tom Watson was way more fun than it should have been. It wasn't like a barn burner. It wasn't an excellent fight. But given that I expected it to be, that was the most UFC middleweight matchup ever put together. It's like two guys who you don't care about, and you're like, how have they not fought before? This makes no sense. But then it actually ended up being a pretty solid fight, and definitely more so because of Natal than because of Watson. Natal did a surprisingly good job of outboxing Watson in that fight, and given how much trouble better strikers like Sam Alvey have had with Tom Watson recently, that says some pretty good things about where Natal's striking might actually lie. I still think he's a little chinny. He's not great. He's not particularly durable, and I think part of that is because he puts himself in bad positions when he's striking. He doesn't quite have enough polish to keep himself in like a good stable position. Against oh my God, I'm who the hell is he fighting? Uriah Hall. Against Uriah Hall, that's a tricky thing. You know, he will probably struggle to get Hall to the ground, which is where the only place he'll really have a great advantage. And on the feet, like Uriah Hall still got leaky defense. We saw in that fight with Ron Stallings, he was really struggling with Stallings. So Natal will probably make it more competitive than it's expected to be. Hall still has that hype behind him as this devastating, perfect striker. But I do expect Hall to plant a big one on Natal's chin at some point, and if not knock him out, then at least hurt him enough to convince him to calm down and accept the decision loss.
And Zane?
Yeah, I think the thing for me is that Natal, he really needs to be able to, what I've seen most out of him lately is that he needs to be able to push his opponent around physically to beat them. You know, in the terms of Chris Camozzi and Tom Watson, both of them, they're not like the peak of physical performance in the UFC. You know, they're not guys who are going to just like beast their opponent around and like really outmuscle them. And same thing with Tor Troing and Joao Zeffirino and Sean Spencer. But against guys like Ed Herman and Tim Kennedy, who are pretty big middleweights, pretty strong guys, even if, you know, Ed Herman is slower than, you know, Tectonic Shift, Natal has real trouble getting his game to work. He gets stuck because he can't force the clinch and he can't dominate in the clinch. And when he can't dominate in the clinch, he can't get takedowns. And when he can't get takedowns, he's forced to be this winging, overly aggressive, risky striker. And that really, I think, more than anything, plays into what Hall does well. Hall kind of needs guys to come at him wild and without a lot of plan. And when they do that, then he can kind of land these big pot shots and skate around and, you know, have the sort of move backwards and attack style that really favors him. And I just think that that's going to work really well for him. And that every time Natal tries to force a clinch and force a physical fight that will, you know, that he would normally be able to use to win out and win rounds, I think Hall will just throw him off and push him around. And I don't think that Natal holds an edge over Hall physically. And so I think you have to pick Hall here, but there's always that chance that Natal being aggressive and just throwing stuff at Hall will get Hall hurt, and, you know, will keep Hall risk averse himself and keep him just on his back foot, not landing any big strikes. So it could be a Diego Sanchez-esque decision for Natal, but I don't ever like to pick that as a way that somebody's going to win.
Yeah, I think you would have to hurt him early and bully him with wild strikes. And Hall, people have questioned Hall's willingness to fight and his desire to fight at times, so we'll see. But there could be even a chance of a spectacular knockout by Hall here. The odds makers are liking Hall. He is favored -350 all the way up to -400, and Natal is the underdog at +290 all the way up to +336. And now we come to two welterweights, Jung Hyun Kim, Stun Gun Kim, versus Josh Burkman. Kind of a road to redemption for both guys. Kim's coming off a loss. Burkman's coming off a no contest to Hector Lombard. Should be a fun fight. I think Kim has a stylistic advantage over Burkman. Connor, what do you think?
It's a tough one. It really depends on which Kim shows up.
If it's new, dumb Kim, all bets are off.
Yeah, like the brawler tends to really struggle with the counterpuncher and the boxer, and Burkman is very good off of his back foot. Like when he gets a chance to breathe, Kim has the ability to put on intelligent pressure, and he has the ability to kickbox okay from range as well. And when he mixes that in with his clinch game and his wrestling and his jiu-jitsu, then that makes him a really well-rounded fighter. When he abandons that in favor of being an action fighter, he really leaves himself open. Thing is that it's tough. That may actually give him a little bit of a stylistic edge because Burkman likes to play the counterpuncher, and that can leave him waiting around too much. Again, I don't know why I'm bringing up this fight so much, probably because I just watched it, but Sam Alvey versus Tom Watson, Alvey's a really solid counterpuncher, but Watson just kind of shut his game down early with activity alone. And that can be tough for a guy who really likes to wait for that one perfect punch. Burkman can be like that sometimes. Um, I'm gonna pick Burkman. I don't think I can really. It's not because I don't think Kim can win. It's because I don't have faith that Kim will fight intelligently. Whereas I know what Burkman is going to try to do. You know, Burkman to me is a very reliable fighter. He doesn't always win, but like he's a trustworthy veteran. And Kim has proven himself to just be an absolute wild card. So I wouldn't be surprised if Kim won, but I think it's safer to pick Burkman.
And Zane, your thoughts?
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, I think that the big question I have is honestly just like how much more physically imposing Kim could potentially be over Burkman, because I do feel like Hector Lombard had a huge edge over Burkman in physicality, and Kim's a big welterweight. He's big and strong.
And yet Burkman was in the fight. I mean, he didn't allow himself to get blown away.
Yeah, and that has to do with the fact that Lombard's not a consistent striker by any stretch of the imagination, and neither is Kim. So Burkman, I don't think Kim's going to knock him out, but it could be one of those situations like the Lombard fight where Burkman's in the fight, but he's also just getting pushed around all fight.
Yeah.
And especially with Kim's clinch game and trip game, where he can really push people around there. But yeah, Wildman Kim, it's really hard to trust him. And I got to go with Burkman. I think I don't know. Kim just doesn't, like, his fight with John Hathaway was, that was like a 50-50 fight that Kim won off just a wild spinning back fist. And I don't know. I'll take Burkman, I guess, but it's not, like, and nobody ever bet on this fight. Ever.
Yeah, this is a risky fight. I think what you're dealing with is the psychological reality of Burkman is a guy who was in the UFC, then out of the UFC. He's really happy to be here. He kind of knows his place. I don't think he has title aspirations. I mean, I'm sure he has title aspirations, but realistically, he expects to get some high-profile fights, win some, lose some. Kim is a guy, I think, who thought he was going to be a champion or a title contender for a long time, and every time he fought guys at that Carlos Condit level, he fell way short. And now he's at a point where he's like, well, I'm not going to be a champion. I want to be the Korean Zombie. I want to be entertaining. I want fans to like me. I want to stay in the UFC. I don't want to be Yushin Okami. And so, here he is now. He's the definition of a guy you can't trust, to quote Eugene Robinson. And so anybody's guess what's going to come up next. And up next, the final fight on the prelims, flyweights John the Magician Dodson versus Zach Makovsky, the former Bellator bantamweight champion. Fun fight. I think the X factor is how injured is John Dodson and how recovered is he? Is this the old magician or is this a specter of the old magician? And Connor, you're nodding, you talk.
That's a great point. The injury is really the only thing that I could see holding John Dodson back in this fight, though. I think he has a really distinct stylistic advantage against Makovsky. Dodson has struggled for lack of activity in the past, but Makovsky's kind of the same. Makovsky, if he's given an opponent who's like the Scott Jorgensen fight, his activity was pretty good in that fight, but he was in there with a guy who was coming forward but not really a huge threat. He was just basically constantly presenting new openings for Makovsky to jump on, and Dodson is not that. And Dodson's probably going to be the only guy that Makovsky has faced who is not only faster than him, but he's probably going to be the hardest guy to time that Makovsky's ever seen. Dodson has this really weird way of moving in one rhythm and then suddenly changing speeds. He'll do these little quick choppy steps where it's just very difficult to gauge when that strike is actually coming, and then of course when the strike does come, it hits really, really hard. And Makovsky has proven to be hittable in the past. We've seen him stunned a couple of times. I just think John Dodson's going to be like Dudu Dantas. He's just going to have that power and that speed to overwhelm a guy like Makovsky. I don't know that he's physically stronger, but I do think at range he's got a distinct advantage.
Zane?
Yeah, this is like, I don't know. I like Zach Makovsky a lot, so I don't want to write him off. I think that's kind of like, but when you're
He's a
talking about,
couple losses away from being the flyweight journeyman you were just speaking of earlier that we don't have.
I forgot to say the same thing before my spiel too. Like, I really like Zach Makovsky as a fighter. I love watching Zach Makovsky fight. So it bums me out to say that. I don't see it. Like, is
yeah,
Makovsky going to get Dodson to the ground often? He's not Mighty Mouse. Like, I don't think so. And that's really where he does
no.
his best work.
Yeah, I mean, his striking has been just too inconsistent. Like, one of the big things we've seen lately with Hussier Formiga is how the revolution in his striking has changed the way people have to fight him. And when Makovsky fought him, he didn't want to strike with him. He just didn't. It wasn't going to work. And so Makovsky got into these wrestling and scrambling battles, and he lost them over and over and over again. And I think that Dodson's going to be so fast on his feet, and so, he's so quick and he's so powerful that Makovsky's going to get forced into the same kind of battle, where he's going to be the one trying to initiate the scramble and look to wrestle, and he's just not going to be quite quick enough to do it. He's not going to be quick enough to win that battle. And, like I say, as a fan of his, that kind of sucks, because that's like the ultimate, moment of reality, that you hit that point where there are some guys that are just better. And I think that's what we have with John Dodson, is he's just better.
Yeah, I mean, that's the limitation of somebody who's a really grappling-based fighter with limited striking. There's some fights they're just going to be out of. If they can't get the takedown and they can't hang on the feet, they're in deep trouble. So Dodson is heavily favored, as you would expect, anywhere from -460 all the way up to -525. And Makovsky is the underdog at +300 all the way up to +431. And that brings us to another flyweight fight, John Moraga and Joseph Benavidez. Pretty surprising to see two flyweight fights on a card this good, but these are very good. What am I talking about? There's flyweights, Benavidez and Moraga. Just totally threw me to have two flyweight fights back to back, but one's on the pay-per-view, one's on the prelims. Benavidez, alpha male, the blue chipper. Moraga, the puncher. Sometimes has a guillotine choke. Does he have a chance, Connor?
They're all good action flyweight fights too. I should point that out. And before I talk about this one, how come this one's on the main card and Dodson Makovsky's on the prelims?
Because Dodson is a slightly bigger name. He's fought for the title, so they want him on the Fox Sports 1 card.
I see. So it's actually because I was going to say Dodson Makovsky's the more meaningful fight, like at this moment in time.
Yeah, but that's just that's the bummer of being somebody like John Dodson, who's good, but he's not so popular. He's going to sell pay-per-views. He might get some more people to tune in. Whereas Benavidez and Moraga, I mean, Benavidez has been in title fights too. He's not the magician. He wasn't on the reality show. He didn't get the big knockouts. That's my guess.
And he's had the two losses to the champ, so he's just it's going to be a few wins before Benavidez gets his way back to the top of the heap.
And so the pay-per-view opener is traditionally an action fight, not a selling fight. So they're looking to open the card with some action. But we'll see. They're going to be in the giant-sized octagon. If they were in the smaller octagon, action would be much more guaranteed. But we'll see.
Although with Moraga, I don't really know that Moraga is going to be able to get away from Benavidez if Benavidez wants to come after him. So I'm not sure the size will play too much of a role. Man, Moraga is so hard to get a handle on as a fighter. He is just really, I said before, he's the Ricardo Lamas of the flyweight division. He's just like, you never know what he's doing. You could constantly ask yourself during a John Moraga fight, what is he doing to win this fight right now? What is he actually doing to further his chances of winning? And yet he wins pretty regularly, and he beats good fighters. And at times he even looks brilliant. At times he has looked like one of the best boxers in the UFC. When he knocked out Ulysses Gomez, that was a beautiful boxing performance. He was making Gomez miss. He was keeping him at the perfect distance to make these punches land with power without getting hit in return. Then other times it's like the Dustin Ortiz fight. It's like, what are you doing, man? You're just shooting for takedowns on the guy that you're happily out striking and winding up in insane grinding wrestling battles. It was a fight that Moraga should have lost. So as for Benavidez, I don't know. I still see Benavidez as a pretty reliable fighter. I still have a pretty good idea of what Benavidez is going to do. Nothing in a Benavidez fight has shocked me other than when he got knocked out by Mighty Mouse. Really. So you have to pick Benavidez in this fight. Moraga always has that X factor of just being such an opportunistic fighter. Something could happen. It could be that fight where Benavidez starts to slip, but it is impossible to actually pick John Moraga over Joe Benavidez at this point.
Yeah, I have to agree. And Moraga, I think, is another guy who's 1 or 2 losses away from being a flyweight journeyman. Good fighter, probably not ever going to be the champ, and soon will be a gatekeeper in the division. Zane, disagree or agree?
Well, I mean, I think there's a chance that Moraga still has some development to do and still has the best years of his career ahead of him. Like, he's been fighting for a lot less time than Benavidez, considerably less. He's still, like, right in the prime of his career right now. But this is, on paper, this is the fight that John Moraga is going to lose every time throughout his career if he keeps fighting the way he does. And I don't even know that he could fix that because he's not. Like, the biggest thing for him is that he's a foot slow flyweight. And he wins being a foot slow flyweight. But he's not the kind of guy that, like, Connor said, he's not going to get away from Joseph Benavidez. He's just not. And there's a class of athlete that is always going to take Moraga apart. And I don't think, it's the sort of thing where the beating that Demetrius Johnson put on John Moraga was one-sided to the point that I wouldn't even say that it had much to do with, like, how technically deft Demetrius Johnson is, but it's just such a gap between, it doesn't, like, Moraga's not going to compete with that level, and I think that Benavidez is going to show him that one more time. And at the same time, Moraga will continue to be a top 5 flyweight, a gatekeeper to the top 5. He's like Bisping, where it's like, Bisping was consistently the number 5 middleweight for a while, but he was nowhere near the guys ahead of him. It's just, like, not even.
It was just a gear he didn't have.
Yeah.
I mean, when it gets into the very high level guys and they're bringing their A game, he can't compete. And Moraga, I think, is in the same boat. So you're picking Benavidez.
I'm picking Benavidez, and I think it'll be really brutally one-sided.
Yeah, and this has the biggest odds of the card so far, and I think the biggest odds we're going to see. You've got Benavidez favored from -550 to start, all the way up to -700. So for a fight card that's this anticipated, we're seeing a lot of heavy odds on one side or the other, which makes for more fun, honestly. And John Moraga is the underdog at +370 all the way up to +530, and that brings it to heavyweights. Andre, what am I doing on a pay-per-view? Arlovski and Travis Browne. What do we think? Are these guys, the thing that Eugene and I were wrestling with is these guys are both trained to Greg Jackson in the past. Are they going to be too palsy? Does Andre ever need an excuse to coast through a fight? Does Travis have the skills to force Andre to fight? Are we going to get a fight here, or are we going to get a slow dance? Zane, you go first.
Travis Browne doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that makes a lot of friends in his camps.
That is what I'm hoping for.
I was going to describe him as an evil motherfucker. That's how he strikes me when he fights.
But more than that, he just, like, he strikes me as the kind of guy that is willing to burn the bridges, like.
Well, he did. He left Greg Jackson in an acrimonious situation.
Yeah, and and it's not even. I don't even think that that's a bad thing. Like, I'm not saying that he's, a bad guy or anything. He's just willing to say, I'm leaving here. I'm done with you guys. I'm doing something better. And, like, that's great. I'd rather see a fighter actually do that than, like, oh yeah, I used to train there and I'm still buddy with all those guys. And it's like, well, no, you're trying to be the best in the world here. You're not trying to be the teammate who's really good with all of his other teammates.
Yeah.
It's a combat sport. So I don't think that there's going to be a lot of buddy-buddiness that I would be worried about. I also don't think that Arlovski is going to be competitive. I don't know. This is one of those things where Brandon Schaub is a really inconsistent performer to a degree that is, worked. It's almost miraculous considering how much athletic potential he has and has shown. I think it's just that, like, him getting knocked out really put a lot of the skills and aggression that he's willing to use on hold, and that meant that his fight with Arlovski was really ugly. And then Antonio Silva, as we've seen, is just a shadow of himself in every way possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is going to look a lot more like Andrei Arlovski versus Anthony Johnson, where Arlovski had something. He was able to land some shots and stay in there and even hurt Johnson, but he couldn't do so with any of the kind of consistency to win the fight at all.
And he's chinny and afraid. He's got sweet kickboxing skills and speed for the division, but
I would actually say that he's not. Whatever his chin problems are, those may not be the factor. I don't even know that he'll get knocked out. He hasn't looked chinny lately at all.
No, but he still blinks because he thinks he's chinny. I mean, that's the thing. Arlovski, to me, is big.
I mean, he's just he's got 20. He started fighting in 1999. He's got 16 years of fight wear on his body, and
mind.
Yeah, and Travis Browne doesn't, and he's very athletic. He's been inconsistent, but I actually think that especially over Travis Browne. Brendan Schaub rather. Browne's starting to show a little more consistency now with the new camp, starting to lose some of the Greg Jackson spin kick flair, and that is going to be better for him, especially against somebody like Arlovski.
A tall guy who clinches and uppercuts people is way more dangerous in the heavyweight division than a guy who tries to be 6'8" and throws spinning wheel kicks that you can see coming almost literally a mile away. You can see Travis Browne's spinning wheel kick from space.
Yes.
It's that obvious. So,
yes.
It's going to sound shocking coming on the heels of Zane's comment about the length of Arlovski's career, but I think Andrei Arlovski is basically the same as he has ever been. And in fact, I might say Andrei Arlovski is one of the most consistent fighters in MMA. And I don't think Arlovski's problem has ever been that he's fading. I don't even think he's particularly chinny. I think he doesn't like getting hit. I think he reacts really badly to getting hit, where he either flinches and gets hurt by a big punch, or out of insecurity, he gets into a reckless brawl. Those are the two ways he reacts to getting hurt because he doesn't like to take those shots. But I don't think Arlovski's problem is that he's fading. He hasn't shown any signs of fading. I think the game has passed him by, where he's really kind of a one-dimensional striker. I mean, if you look at Arlovski's fights, he's kind of a one-handed fighter. He's got a jab, which he shows you, and he flings this giant right hand. He's got a great uppercut as well off of that right hand. The man has no left hook. He cannot fight off the back foot. He has to throw himself forward to do damage. And against a guy like Travis Browne, who is probably going to be coming forward and trying to pressure him, that's not exactly a great place in which to be. That when he does leap forward with that straight right or the overhand right, that could spell disaster for Browne. Arlovski always has that punch, and he hits really, really hard. It's not an accident that he is the only other man besides Mark Hunt to have knocked out Roy Nelson. And as iffy as his stand-up in that fight was, Arlovski did legitimately destroy Nelson's chin with a series of hard right hands. So that Arlovski's always dangerous there. But I just think Browne. I liked what I saw from Browne in the Schaub fight. I thought he looked like he really improved his fundamentals, just like the basic simple things. Whereas before he basically didn't have any fundamentals. It was like, okay, now I'm going to throw the flying knee. Now he expects that, so now I'm going to throw the hook kick. Now I'm going to throw the overhand. It was just like pieces that didn't fit together. Jackson Winklejohn style. That's how it is. With Tverdian, it was like setting things up with the jab, putting the uppercut behind it. And I also expect Browne to get this fight to the ground, and I think Arlovski can be tricky there, but he's never, ever been a dominant ground fighter. He's always, surprised people by dropping for, a heel hook or something, but he's never been a great grappler. So I kind of do expect Browne to knock Arlovski out, and I expect it to happen, in the second or third round on the ground.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we got to move, guys. The Browne is heavily favored again. -14 all the way up to -475, and Arlovski's the dog at +315 all the way up to +380. And that brings us to lightweights. Donald Cerrone versus John Makdessi. This was supposed to be Khabib Nurmagomedov in a title opportunity. Cerrone might get a title shot off this. Makdessi coming in on a short notice and stepping way, way up in competition. I'm expecting a Cerrone knockout quickly. Zane?
I don't know that I'd expect a Cerrone knockout quickly. I mean, McDessie's got a great jaw. Like, McDessie's got a great chin.
He's tough, and he's a good boxer, and he's obviously got the crazy Taekwondo thing going. He's tougher than people expect. I just think Cerrone is at a peak right now and at a much higher level.
Yeah, and I think there's something to that, certainly, but I just think this is going to be a more competitive fight than people are maybe expecting on the way to Cerrone winning. Like, McDessie, the biggest problem here is that, if he gets, like, he has some stylistic problems, especially with getting stuck outside against longer fighters. And then, what we saw in his last fight, like, he looked better. His inside boxing looked better, which is definitely good for him against Cerrone. Because Cerrone, is not necessarily unwilling to let fighters inside, especially early in fights. But he had Shane Campbell so physically outmatched that it's really hard to tell just how much better that was and how much of a factor it was of just being able to toss Campbell around. I don't know. I think maybe what we might see is a slightly better version of the Cerrone Adriano Martins fight, where Martins had the opportunities early and then sort of started to give Cerrone a lot of time and let him set up. And I don't think McDessie quite has that second gear or that second process where he actually thinks about setting up his future combinations and his future work off what he's doing in the moment and feinting and doing some of the more complicated parts of the game. And at that point, Cerrone becomes very dangerous. So I think it'll be good. I think Cerrone won't. I don't know that I'll pick Cerrone by knockout, but I'll take Cerrone by decision.
And Connor?
Yeah, I think Makdessi is all tactician, like Zane said. Like, he's all about finding the openings in these specific little instances and exchanges. He's really good at finding the spaces for those punches. And he, not only does he have a better chin than advertised, he hits harder than advertised too. He, he could very well land some shots like he did against Hene Forch or like he did in his last fight against Shane Campbell. That right hand is dangerous. He takes really good angles to land it. So if he gets Cerrone like covering up, if he stuns him with something, he's got an opportunity there. He could very well do to Cerrone what Eddie Alvarez did in the first round.
Yeah.
Ultimately, though, he'll probably also suffer the same fate that Eddie Alvarez did in the second and third rounds, because Cerrone's going to kick his legs, and Makdessi fights at a TriStar, so he is not going to check those kicks. It's just not something that they do, and in particular, it's not something that Makdessi does. And Cerrone is better than Shane Campbell, and I agree with you, Nate. I think he's absolutely peaking. I think he's at his best form ever, probably the best form he will ever be in. And yeah, I don't know about a knockout, but I do think Cerrone will win, and it could be like a leg kick TKO. Like, I really think his best shot is a triding and wearing Makdessi down over the course of the fight.
I also think a rear naked choke is a strong possibility too.
I would say that I expect this fight to look almost exactly like Donald Cerrone, Eddie Alvarez. Quite honestly.
Yeah, I think it's quite similar. And Makdessi probably won't try to wrestle quite as much as Alvarez did, but he'll be just as successful with it regardless. So,
yeah. So Cerrone is again heavily favored, minus 470 all the way up to minus 600. Makdessi is the underdog, plus 375 all the way up to 472. That brings us to the co-main event, middleweight title fight, Chris Weidman, Vitor Belfort. Is this Vitor Belfort going to be the supercharged Vitor Belfort, the TRT Vitor Belfort we've been seeing in Brazil for the last couple of years, or are the glory days over?
We've already seen dad bod Vitor Belfort on the internet, so I think supercharged Vitor Belfort is probably not about to come back in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, I don't think he's coming back. And I mean, my conspiracy hat was on because they didn't impose the new drug policies until after this fight, which I thought was sort of convenient. But yeah, I think Vitor's got too much to lose, and they've been on him too closely. So, it is what it is. Chris Weidman looking great. Connor, you want to talk about this fight?
Vitor Belfort has not fought since 2013. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but it is really hard to know what to expect from Belfort. That being said, Belfort trains with a really good team of fighters. He works with Henri Hooft. He also works with I'm blanking on his name. It's Guillermo Rigondel's boxing coach, Cuban boxing coach.
Yeah.
Please remind me if you find it, Zane.
I will.
And and the Black Zillions team he also has the benefit of I think he's been training with Rumble since they've both been preparing for fights at the same time. So he's been training with a guy who has a lot of similarities. Pedro Diaz, thank you. Who also trains like Cosmo Alexander and a lot of good fighters. Rumble has a lot of similarities to Chris Weidman. He counters more than Weidman, but they're both pressure fighters. They're both strong wrestlers. They both like to come forward and push you into the cage and force you to kind of fight your way out desperately. And so Belfort's been training with a guy who presents some of the same problems. Historically, Belfort has not done well against those kinds of fighters. Even though he's a very good counterpuncher, and I think that's been the biggest development in his game in like the past 3 or 4 years, that he has found a knack for waiting on openings rather than trying to blitz and rush his way through. And he throws good combinations on counter too. He'll hit you with 3 or 4 shots after you open yourself up. But Weidman comes forward pretty responsibly. He's got a nice stance. He throws a good jab. He throws a lot of volume in kicks just to kind of push you around the octagon. And then once he gets you to the cage, he's going to clinch with you and take away that dynamism. He's going to take away that range striking that makes Vitor so dangerous. And Belfort has never, ever done well against guys who take him down and try to grind him out. And I don't think Weidman will have a lot of difficulty. Granted, Luke Rockhold really, really struggled to get Belfort down. His takedown defense may be much better than it used to be. And it was hard to say how good it was against John Jones because that fight was all Belfort pulling guard. So who knows? But
both of those fights were super juiced Vitor, and
yes.
Rockhold frankly seemed scared of Vitor.
He did, and I don't think Weidman's scared of anybody. I mean, you've gone in there against both Anderson Silva twice and Lyoto Machida, and you just stare them down and beat them up. That says a lot about the level of your confidence. So yeah, I think I can always count on Weidman to not chicken out under the spotlight, and I just think the wrestling and the pressure, I don't know how Belfort can deal with that, so I've got to go with the champ.
All right, and Zane?
Yeah, I would say in terms of Luke Rockhold that, with the takedown defense thing, is that Rockhold's he's a very good dynamic takedown artist, but he's not like a technical marvel. If he's not able to be the faster, the more powerful fighter in there, he's not going to hit a really complicated takedown setup that's going to just sweep you off your feet. It's not like Cormier in there where he's gonna pick an ankle and suddenly you're flying through the air. But
nor is Weidman. I mean, he's not an explosive takedown per se.
No, but Weidman phase shifts brilliantly and mixes it up brilliantly. I mean, you never know what he's coming with when he's coming and he can cut off the cage. I don't think Rockhold can cut off the cage.
Pieces of his game definitely fit to better than the pieces of Rockhold's game.
Yeah, I think that this is. In danger of glossing over it, this kind of reminds me of the difference between Lyoto Machida versus Gegard Mousasi and Lyoto Machida versus Luke Rockhold, where we have Vitor Belfort against somebody, against some fighters that have really, matched well with him, or against Dan Henderson and Michael Bisping, and then Luke Rockhold with that huge win when he was obviously just a weird win. And then you have the difference between what you should actually expect when Vitor Belfort faces somebody like the champ, like Chris Weidman at his peak. And I just think that it's just going to be a total physical mismatch, and that Belfort may, maybe one of the things where you get sort of almost deer in the headlights like you did with Anderson Silva, where it's just
and much more so. Vitor's always been mentally weak, and also, as Eugene will talk about, the thing with steroids and testosterone, which Belfort is documented to have used with the testosterone replacement, as well as the times he's been caught using it illegally. That affects your confidence a lot. If you're not on your super juice, you feel like you're not Superman anymore. And I think I'm expecting another Belfortine, a la what Randy Couture did to Vitor back in the day, where he just takes him down and bloodies him up.
It's possible with like the mental effects that testosterone has in you, the way it just makes you feel more aggressive and competitive with this drive to win. That Belfort's dominance was not just a matter of physical changes, but a matter of him suddenly like shucking off these mental holes that had been plaguing him for years. Yeah, without it, he's once again against the guy that used to beat the old version of Vitor with ease.
Yeah, and so Weidman is heavily favored, minus 474, all the way up to -5, all the way up to minus 675, and Vitor Belfort is plus 350, all the way up to plus 475. So some pretty wide odds here, but I would still have to go Chris Weidman all the way on this one. Now we get to the fight that is close. The light heavyweight championship, the headliner of the card, and this is the first fight on the card where both guys are in the plus or minus 100 something range. So Anthony Rumble Johnson, Daniel Cormier, very exciting fight. Personally, I think Cormier has a stylistic edge because of his wrestling and his phase shifting, and we've seen Rumble struggle against wrestlers in the past, although those were at different sizes. But I think Johnson's chances were better against John Jones than they are against Daniel Cormier. Connor, do you agree?
I have to disagree with you, Nate. I gotta say, I think
Tell us about it.
I think that Johnson's difficulties with wrestlers in the past were just a completely different Anthony Johnson. And it's not that he's like now comfortable at his weight. I mean, obviously that's part of it. But under Henri Hooft and the other coaches at the Black Zillions, Jorge Santiago and them, he has really developed very technical takedown defense, where Anthony Johnson is really, really good at. He gives you just enough resistance when the takedown's initiated to get off to the side, and then he just lets you run through this empty space that he's created with his angle, and you're just left like embarrassed by how badly your takedown attempt failed. You know, Phil Davis was able to get in on his hips, and all it was like a quick angle change, shuck him off, and Phil Davis is just stumbling around the octagon, having thrown himself into a takedown against a guy who was no longer there. So
but Phil Davis was never the MMA wrestler Cormier is, and he's not going to be able to. He was completely unable to compel respect from Rumble on the feet. Cormier can hit hard. He's going to be at range. He's going to have the disadvantage, but Rumble's going to have to respect his power.
That is true. But even as a wrestler, both in freestyle wrestling and in MMA, Cormier has always been best as a counter wrestler. That's really what like his specialty. Like once he gets to the ground, or if he sprawls on you and gets a chance to move to your back and go for a ride, he is really, really dangerous there. He's kind of similar to Phil Davis, really, in terms of wrestling ability. He's not like an explosive double leg kind of guy. He hits some nice reactive takedowns, but he didn't even have an easy time getting Roy Nelson down. And Roy Nelson's takedown defense is not as good as Anthony Johnson's. I just don't think it is. So, yeah, whereas, you know, I anticipate seeing Rumble putting a lot of pressure on Cormier. I do think the infighting will be really interesting in this fight. Both these guys have some really interesting tricks in close range. If Cormier can get into the clinch, if he can put Rumble's back to the fence, he'll have a really good chance of making this ugly, difficult fight. And we have no idea how well Rumble will be in the 5th round, whereas I think you know, Cormier having been exhausted in the 5th round of the John Jones fight was more like mental exhaustion. Other times he's gone to the 5th round, like his fight with Josh Barnett, where he just beat up on Josh Barnett for 5 rounds straight. He looked fresh. He looked completely fine.
Well, I think Jones taking him down fatigued him enormously because he was not expecting that.
Yeah, I think it broke him. And the fact that Jones just did it like 3 times just for shits and giggles, like he just took him down and let him up just to prove that he was the better wrestler. And I really think that Cormier himself admitted he was too emotionally invested in that fight. And he's an emotional guy. It's obvious listening to him talk. He really gets invested in these fights. In this one, I think he's more interested in winning than he is in beating the shit out of Rumble. And I think that's better for him. He's a competitor, but he's not like a fighter in that sense. Johnson likes to knock people out and hurt them. He's interested in beating people up, but he thrives on that. So I don't know, man. I don't really see Cormier having a reliable way of pressuring Johnson. I don't see him having a reliable way of getting to that close range and staying there. And if he doesn't, I just don't think he can go for long without avoiding the big shot. I will say I would much rather have Daniel Cormier as the light heavyweight champion, as in reality, the #1 contender waiting for John Jones's return. Just as a person, I think Cormier strikes me as a really good dude. Rumble Johnson does not. We won't go over again the reasons why that is. but I don't see a clear path to victory for Cormier at all.
All right. So are you expecting an early knockout from Rumble?
Not necessarily early, but I think like second, third round, we'll probably see Rumble land that big shot. Once he finds his openings, he's a great counterpuncher coming forward, and Cormier just leaves himself a little too open. I mean, he was getting countered by John Jones, and Jones's boxing is not nearly as good as Rumble's is.
Yeah, that's true. And Zane?
Yeah, I gotta agree. And, this is a fight that I came in, I think, feeling a little bit split over. But the more I think about it, the less I like the matchup for Cormier, really. I I think the big things for me are one of the big factors, and I don't know how much Rumble will take advantage of this. What for Cormier getting tired was just how heavily Jones beat him up to the body in their fight. That was like every time Cormier would come in, Jones would land like a huge knee to the body that you was just like crunching. I don't know how much Anthony Johnson will do that. Probably not nearly as much. But I just think that Cormier, he's actually he's a great dirty boxer, really, but he's still not a good outside striker. And he gets peppered and pot shotted at range by fighters who are willing to, throw at him at range and who can trust themselves to throw at him at range. I mean, John Jones, that's something like, John Jones' range striking mechanics are not amazing, but he still hit Cormier fairly regularly from the outside. And Johnson's range striking mechanics are pretty amazing. Like, they are really, really solid. And he's got the preparation. He's got the style that works perfectly for takedown defense. It's sort of like the same thing we see out of Joanna Jędrzejczyk, where, it's the hands at the hips, cocked, ready to stop the takedown, and then the head movement and the hand movement to block the strikes. And with Cormier, the way he comes in and the way he comes in predictably and on straight lines, really, I just don't think he's going to avoid getting hit really, really hard coming in over and over again after Anthony Johnson. And at that point, I worry about him just eating a really hard shot that makes the rest of the fight predictable and ugly for him and puts him in that position where he's just shooting takedowns that he can't get. Even as good a wrestler as he is, that's, the best wrestlers still, if they get in a position where all they can do is try to go for takedowns, don't tend to get those takedowns.
Yeah, and I think some of what Rumble does so well with takedown defense has to do with the comparison to Jędrzejczyk is great because both of them are fighters who don't throw a lot of volume, and I think that's actually has a lot to do with it. Like, they like to pressure, they like to push you back, they like to touch you with jabs and things like that. But Rumble he only picks his shots. He does not really force openings as a pressure fighter. He waits for the counter and he pot shots. And so he's never sitting down in this 3-punch combination that forces your feet to set and lets the guy get in on your hips. So I don't really see him getting countered with a takedown. And if Cormier has to rush at him to get the takedown, it's Rumble's angles all day long. He's going to stop the initial shot, take an angle, and he's been getting better and better at hitting you when you like what Jędrzejczyk did to Esparza. You don't just get stuffed in your takedown, you also get punished for trying it, and that's a really difficult thing, even for as mentally tough a fighter like Cormier. It's a tough thing to have to go through.
Yeah, you guys are spooking me because Johnson has improved so much in the Blackzilians camp and also at this weight class. And to the combination of silky smooth technique and great power is fearsome. I still feel like Cormier, though, maybe it's just wishful thinking, but I still have a vision of Cormier taking his back, getting the double, the body lock, taking him down, frustrating him, tiring him out. I've seen that look on Anthony Johnson's face so many times where he's laying on his back, he's given up trying to get up, and he's just got this, somebody help me look on his face. We'll see if he's past that.
There is the fact of volume too. Cormier definitely has the volume advantage. If he can really, really push a pace early, that could happen. Johnson's not been there in a while, so it's possible that this horrible memory of getting choked out by Vitor Belfort comes back to him. Just being lost in the woods. So, but I think that Johnson's looked so cool and composed lately in his fights. It's just hard to picture that being the same fighter.
It's quite possibly true. The Black Zillions have really done wonders with him, and so the odds are very close on this one. Although Cormier is favored, so if you believe our boys, this might be one you want to drop everything on. Everything, take all the money out, everything. Money you don't have, money people you don't even know have. So Cormier minus 121 all the way up to minus 135, and Anthony Johnson at plus 100 all the way up to plus 118. So very narrow. And I mean, just a stacked fight card. Looking forward to it. We'll be back with the 6th round immediately afterwards. Any final thoughts on the card, gentlemen?
This is a shitty card for betting, but it will be a great card for viewing. I have only 2 fights that I think are maybe worth placing money on. I think Namajunas at minus 280. Odds are kind of long, but I think she's got a pretty reliable shot of winning there. And I think a little bit of money on Johnson at plus 100 or plus 118, I don't think it could hurt you. I really think he's got the edge here. So.
All right. And Zane, any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great card. It's a card that, like, I think for as much as the odds are one-sided, there are maybe the only fight there are only a couple of fights that I just see no way the fight is close. Like where, maybe with Moraga Benavidez, and even then Moraga is such a opportunistic fighter that there's always a chance that he's getting beat up for a round and a half before pulling something out. But like there aren't any fights I see on here where I think the ending is as predictable as I think the odds are right. Like I don't think that Uriah Hall is bad. Like I don't think that him being minus 350 or even 400 is wrong against Rafael Natal, but there's certainly a reasonable chance that Rafael Natal beats Uriah Hall.
Yeah, some of these fights, the underdogs are going to win some of these fights, probably 2 to 3 of them. So,
yeah.
And they're almost all reliably fun matchups. Like that's the really good thing about this card. Like not only does it have name value, which it has a lot of name value, a lot of relevant fights, but also like I would say like 80% of the fights will be action fights, and so that's a that's a nice thing to see on the card.
Well, we've got high hopes. So remember, subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at @TheZaneSimon, @KidNate, and @BoxingBush, BUSCH for Connor. Read us on BloodyElbow.com. We'll be back with the 6th round on Saturday night immediately after the fights. Eugene will be back with Knuckle Up. I can't even see beyond this card, but we've got a big June coming up with Cain Velasquez and Fabricio Verdum with a couple of, I think there's 2 fight nights between that, Condit Alves and a really bad one, Boach versus Dan Henderson. So
a really sad one.
Yeah, it is. I has a sad about that. But Saturday night, this is the fight card my buddies that don't pay attention very often are showing up for. So it should be very exciting. And John Jones, wherever you are, keep your nose clean, stay out from behind the wheel, get your shit together. We want to see you back in the cage. Don't care about you as a human being, but really enjoy your fights. So, and that's even harsh. I'm indifferent as a human being, but definitely want to see you make the most of your career. So get out there and fix yourself. And Johnson versus Cormier should be fun. So adios, MMA aficionados. This is Kid Nate. We'll see you next time. And Zane, you got to kill us.